I've been keeping a list of films that over the course of my really short career as a film critic have actually almost put me to sleep while I was watching. The first was Drive, the second was Killing Them Softly, and well, at least on the one hand, this one at least managed to get past the opening credits before it started putting me to sleep, but let's just say it's not entirely the only film to ever really start with a bang, if you catch my drift. Yeah, that joke was stupid. Let's just start with this episode of Romney's Reviews already. The issues I had with this film can pretty much be boiled down to two major things. The first is that we're essentially given a lot of characters, but we don't really get to know them as characters per se, or more specifically, we're not given really any reason to care about them. Yes, I guess you could say that you kind of empathize with Michael Fassbender's character, and I know some people think, oh yeah, you don't necessarily need to give the protagonist a name that's like an actual name, you could just be called Driver or Counselor, but really, even with his character, although he has stuff that could be lost, we never really see the reason why he decides to do a lot of the deals with this whole drug trade, which in and of itself isn't really shown very well. On top of that, the film also has the tendency to jump from character to character for no real reason. And on top of that, I mean, the actors they cast are good actors, but I just didn't really get a feel for their personalities per se. I mean, I guess personality-wise, I got a bit of a feel from Javier Bardem and Cameron Diaz, but in the case of Brad Pitt and Michael Fassbender, just eh. And the fact that the story just kind of jumps around and doesn't really use anything to move the story forward just doesn't really help. The second issue I had is that the screenplay just felt like it was recycling unused or omitted lines from much better movies, because it constantly tries to have like these monologues or scenes that are like addressing some sort of wise saying about either greed or sex or the consequences of one's actions, except it's done in a very pretentious way, as if saying one of these scenes will be memorable, right? It was kind of one of those cases where the film couldn't decide whether it wanted to be completely dialogue driven or be like other films that have action scenes mixed in, because it has a lot of talky scenes, but then it tries to put in some action scenes that just feel really out of place, and on top of that, the dialogue itself is just kinda eh. Overall, the film was just boring. I was just sitting there in the theater thinking, I see stuff happening. Who are these people? And why should I care? I was given no real reason to care about any of the characters, no real reason to really get invested. And especially when our main character, the counselor, you only know so much about him. Like, you know that he has a wife, and that's about it. You don't really know much more than that, is that he has a wife. He's a lawyer. But we're not given any real reason for why someone who's supposed to be like this fine, upstanding lawyer suddenly gets into this really nasty underground dealing thing. We're never shown that. It's only implied, but not implied in a good way, not in a way that gives us enough information. That was my biggest problem with it, especially given how they were kind of driving home the fact that he essentially screwed himself over, but we don't really see why he did it in the first place. All in all, the film just felt like an art house vanity piece that was kind of part of the annoying rule that a lot of actors have, more or less the tenured ones where they do the whole one for them, one for me rule, which kind of hurts their careers in the long run. I'm not really in a position to really comment more on that since I don't pay attention to that aspect of the film business, but really, that's what it felt like. It just felt like something that they were doing for themselves, but not really for the purpose of actually telling a good story. If you're a hardcore cinephile, you'll probably get more out of it than I did, but as a film in general, I advise you to skip it. It's not even worth dollar theater, it's not even worth renting on Netflix. So yeah, that said, I give The Counselor a 2.5 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. As for next week, I'll be taking a look at Ender's Game. See you then.